So for a moment, right, this is a great story that's unwinding here. And of course, we're all excited about it. And wait till they see the course. If they like this at all, the course is just outstanding, right? But there's that little voice in us, right? That little skeptic voice that you've actually told me about comes up in the groups. That as you start to unspool this story, as you start to say, no, Christianity can hold much more than you may have experienced in the traditional church. It actually can do all these other things and all the rest of it. That skeptic in us says, really? I mean, and if that's so, why is it now that we're just hearing about this story? I mean, if that's so true, why weren't we told this before? So you've told me the story, so that's why I wanted to ask you about it. This comes up in the group, so talk a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, if we're going to consider the notion of expanding perspectives, I really hope the skeptic is there, because Christianity could use a skeptic.
A heavy dose.
A heavy dose of skepticism. Right. I really think that's a huge piece. And so, again, it's living your way into the questions, because as I shared with you, my skeptic was huge. And I had this question of why, what's the purpose, or why do we move forward with Christianity? Because so much of the Christianity that I was seeing play out in the culture no longer spoke to me deeply. And so the question that I get a lot of times in the groups is, why didn't they tell us this? And so then I might ask the question back is, why do you ask the question?
And who's they?
And who's they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because again, the location of authority is outside of yourself, all right? So that's the first piece. So what about why didn't I look? And it's because we were never, just as a child, you do what you're told, all right? There was never an atmosphere of inviting you to look within. There was never practices offered to you to start to ask those deeper questions of what about these incongruencies in the Bible? What about these incongruencies in the church? They play out in every culture that we're in. But Christianity is one that's not known for cultivating skepticism. And so when I look at what I see unfolding in terms of these, what you and I sometimes called antibodies to Christianity, is first of all, invite them and hold them. But this isn't some New Age deal here, David. If we look again back to the metaphor of the stars, these contemplative stars were always there. We consider the desert mothers and fathers back in the 3rd and 4th century. I would love to expose young people to some of these readings. My daughter, who kind of has moved away from Christianity, my youngest daughter, and then finds herself moving back, she says, Mom, I didn't know that was there. This is so cool. This is really exciting. And it always was there. It just wasn't foregrounded. So what my hope is in this course is that we start looking at the different stars in the sky and looking at the alternative stories, which really aren't alternative stories. They're just not the dominant stories. They're stories that were always there, but they include your story. Okay, so you are part of it too. And Christianity is, I remember having a conversation with Ken last summer, and my skeptic needed to ask, so why do you include Christianity in your integral map of consciousness? And he said something to me that moved me deeply, because it was the reason that, for me, it's the tradition that I place myself in, that I'm informed by. And he said it's the one tradition whose master says the primary directive is love. And I considered that it is. It's this beautiful, radical we. It's organic. If you look at the Trinity, it's total self-emptying love. And Cynthia Bourgeault uses the metaphor, I believe, of the wheel, of one cup of love pouring itself out into the other, pouring itself out into the other, and filling it up. And it's constant emptying love. And again, what are my obstacles to love? Again and again and again. And this isn't to say other traditions don't have love. But this is the tradition whose primary directive is love, is self-emptying, again and again and again. And there's another obstacle to love. It hit me right there today in this moment. And there are practices to cultivate an experience of love inside of yourself, of you as an embodiment of love, of you as Christ made manifest, and then empty that out into other.
One of the things, when I heard your story, both in the interview and then you now have done, you know, a fuller telling of that we're including in this, one of the aspects of your story that I really resonated with, for all of us that may have come up in the Christian church, either Protestant or Catholic or anything else, I mean, but one of those denominations, and then have this notion of that we go out into the world and we find other things. We may turn east and have a Buddhist contemplative meditation practice, or, you know, any number of the human development pieces that are all so important, you know, for us that we've all walked through. And so this notion that somehow Christianity can't hold all those, you know, all that stuff that is so useful to us as human beings evolving. One of the things that I found in you is that, and even some of the references like Pema Chodron, right, who was one of mine as well, of saying, wow, a Christian practice can actually hold that, her, in this, right, as opposed to outside of it, and Christianity is something else. So talk a little bit about that, because my guess is that there are a lot of people in the audience like me, right, that have had those experiences and really do, again, the skeptic comes up and you go, wait a minute, how can it hold that Tibetan thing that is so important to me, or the Taoist thing that's so important to me?
Well, that's one more piece where I would say try this at home. And that is, when you first consider Christianity, there's this one sacred text, there's this one belief system and one set of doctrines. And so here we are living in an increasingly globalized world. And so, you know, just for me personally, I travel a lot. And so going into different cultures, experiencing different religions, what was so interesting to me is that with each encounter, with each tradition, I would I would really sink myself into that tradition, and most specifically Buddhism and yoga. And what I noticed is that deepening a practice of yoga, or deepening a practice of vipassana meditation from the Buddhist tradition, changed how I experienced myself in my Christian practice. So, an evolutionary Christianity, an emergent Christianity, transcends, all right, old ways of being in Christianity, and includes not only those earlier ways of being, because we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't want to dismantle the scaffolding that brought us to where we are today, the life-giving aspects and the wounding. But we also don't want to limit ourselves to just this text, as if that Christ was only, this is the one way. That really wasn't. It's not the way wisdom teachers are. If you really start to study, again, Jesus from a historical perspective, he was deeply informed by other traditions. So wouldn't we? So you would have not only Buddhism and yogi, but you would have the ecstasy of Rumi. I mean, read a piece of Rumi poetry, and this wouldn't inform your Christian practice? Yeah. And does it have to be called Christianity? Can it be called love as well? Because in our Baltimore Catechism in the Catholic school, God is love. And even including these really demanding questions of atheists, that is included as well, because it includes holy doubt. It includes the questions that we ask. So go ask the questions, rather than saying this is this one way of being. And I think what happens for young people, they go to school, they start asking the questions, and there's no container, there's no space for them to have doubt, to turn away and say, I am not that. And that is part of our humanness, is to reject aspects and then reintegrating them. And that includes other traditions as well.
One of the things that I want to point up here is, you know, what's the course? And certainly there's going to be some examples in addition to this talk about what we're actually doing. So in each of the 12 steps, right, that you're going to give a teaching, a talk, right, where you're going to take one of these subjects, just like you've been doing today, and sort of say, all right, so this is kind of how I see it, and this is where I see it in the world, and then suggest what part of this works for you or not, or something. then you're also going to do in each section, you have a meditation, right? So now you're going to take whatever that subject was and actually practice in a contemplative way about some sort of state as you move through all that. So you're going to do that. So they will get all that, right? Then the third thing I've noticed that you said has really been important in the groups is to journal, right? So there'll be a suggestion of something as you come out of that state that you actually start writing from there and just sort of see what comes up for you. What is your story that is actually emerging on the page?
Yes, because when you journal, you're taking it from kind of this swirling up here, because we're three-centered beings. Right. We're a head, we're a heart, we're a body. Right. And it's taking it and putting it out into a journal, something that you can reflect back on, track your own journey. Mm-hmm. But it really just, neurologically, you're using a whole different set of neural pathways when you journal. It's really important aspect of it. Yeah.
So then in addition to that, then we have all this other optional material because, certainly your path and mine, you find stuff. You find books that, we found Ken, right? And so Ken will be there in some of the things that he speaks directly about. People like Father Keating, we've already mentioned, Reverend Cynthia Bourgeot, who's got this massively new, wonderful book on Mary Magdalene, but Mary Magdalene not in the New Age way, but clearly in the deep Christian practice of what was the relationship between the two of them and all that. Also, trying to think of who else.
Just the Facebook page.
Marcus Borg.
Or Marcus
Borg.
Right,
oh, yeah, exactly. And so the really important piece that Borg brings in about both the historical thing, but moving into then what does that actually mean to our interiors if you start to relate to that there was a human experience, regardless of whether you get feel the divine aspect of that there actually was somebody here, right, that was having a human experience, as we all are, of something, right? So that's, his stuff is critical to that. And then some of our younger teachers, like Rolly Stenich, who has been a student of Ken's for a long while, and Father Keating, and sort of their perspective about it. So all of this, which is mostly going to focus on you leading, but then all of these other ancillary things that people can look at and sort of make their own thing. And then Facebook, we're going to have, right, because we are in the social media world, and you're actually much better at it than I am, right? But we're going to actually have a place, because what happens in the groups automatically is when you start into this work, what? You want to share whatever. Yeah.
And David, this was, and as you know, I was pretty tenacious about including this piece.
Yes, you were.
Because I remember when just going through the theology program, I would meet with people, and sometimes the most fertile discussions happened outside of class, where we would hear a new idea, and our worlds were kind of rocking, and we needed to go out. We would either go out for a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and say, okay, what did she mean by that? So what is that? Do you have that experience? What's that like for you? And and again, sometimes, boy, we never knew this. Yes. How did we not know it was there? And then we would find ourselves looking for books or finding pieces of poetry, and actually a group of us formed a meditation group together. And so it's taking it from the classroom. Again, that's still out there. It's still a little separate from me. The journaling brings it to I, and the Facebook brings it to we. Yeah. We're creating a community from this class, and that was a really important piece of this.